Well, Chile is marking 50 years since the military coup of 1973 that overthrew the government of Salvador Allende. That coup led to a military dictatorship and under Augusto Pinochet that lasted 17 years. Under that regime, thousands of opposition supporters were persecuted, tortured and killed by the army. Chilean President Gabriel Boric gave an address outside La Moneda presidential palace in Santiago. The palace was bombed by Chilean Air Force planes in the coup, and it's where Salvador Allende died. I'll be talking to our correspondent in Santiago in just a moment. But first, this report about a person who witnessed these events 50 years ago firsthand.
The moment that changed Chile forever. The presidential palace in Santiago, La Moneda, under attack. The video footage, an indispensable witness to the military coup in 1973, overthrowing the government of socialist President Salvador Allende. On the day of the attack, he insisted on staying in the palace. Patricia Espejo Brain was his private secretary back then, but she would never see her boss again.
This is where the president committed suicide. He would have never surrendered. That we were all sure of.
On the morning of that day, after some phone calls, she already knew that something was off. She tried to make her way to the presidential palace, but was stopped by the military.
They surrounded me. One of them pulled my arm behind my back. And I said, "But let me through. I am the president's secretary." Saying that only made things worse. They continued to surround me and my car. I had a tiny car. I knew that something tremendous was going on, but I didn't understand what. And then one of Allende's ministers showed up, Minister Flores, and almost without looking at me, he said, "Try to run."
Chile was plunged into chaos as the military took over power under the orders of their commander-in-chief, General Augusto Pinochet. In 1974, Pinochet was declared president by the junta. During his 17 years of rule, thousands of Chileans opposing the regime were arrested, tortured, killed and disappeared. Espejo Brain, however, managed to escape to Cuba, together with her children and one of Allende's daughters, Beatriz, also known as Tati. They left everything behind.
That's where a new life started. A very painful one, because we had no news from our families. I had no idea how my husband was. We knew that the president had died. It was something we would not talk about. Tati and I were not able to talk about it.
From one day to the next, Espejo Brain became an exile, living first in Cuba, then in Venezuela, watching from afar as the Pinochet dictatorship ended in 1990. Despite arrests for human rights violations and atrocities committed during his regime, Pinochet remained untried until his death in 2006. In 2002, Allende's former secretary returned to Santiago for good. Still traumatized by the past, she has made it her mission to keep Allende's memory alive and raise awareness about Chile's history, so the past cannot repeat itself.
We need to seek democracy. Democracy is the system that at least allows us to have a minimum of freedom. It's not an option to say, let's just forget about it because it happened so long ago. That is what the Chilean right is doing with their denial. They say it's not true, that it's a lie. We cannot let that happen. That's my position, and I will defend it until the last day of my life.
DW correspondent Benjamin Alvarez-Gruber is in Santiago. Benjamin, 50 years on, it's very clear the wounds of the military coup still run very deep for survivors. What does the coup and the brutality of the Pinochet regime mean to people living in Chile today?
The wounds are definitely still open. You can see it also with the speeches of the family members of those who were forcibly disappeared. Many of them also appeared and talked today at this commemoration of the 50 years of the military coup in front of the La Moneda presidential palace. The palace was bombarded exactly 50 years ago. Many of them have been searching for years for the remains of their loved ones. Only recently, Chile's Justice Minister presented a new national search plan to find these remains. But of course, you can see there that the Chilean society is still divided when it comes to the coup and when it comes to the 17 years of military dictatorship that followed after it. There are people who still defend what Augusto Pinochet said. There was a recent poll saying that at least 39% of people still support Augusto Pinochet. There have been protests also in front of the presidential palace saying that democracy was broken before 1973, so during the 3 years of Salvador Allende, who committed suicide on September 11th. But of course, the society is still divided. We see it especially on days like this.
Benjamin, I want to talk a bit more about these divisions because a recent survey showed that 60% of Chileans were not interested in the coup. Why do you think that is?
That's right, and that's why we just heard the report why it's so important to talk about these things. But also, if you look at how political parties are reacting to it, because of course we can see how discussions are going in society, but if you take it further and see how political parties are reacting, there's a Chile Vamos, that's a coalition of center-right and right-wing parties. They decided to not attend the ceremony today, to also not sign a declaration by the government. And one party, a right-wing party, even said that what happened on September 11th of 1973, the events, not even talking about a military coup, were inevitable. It shows that many say you have to look forward, you have to look to the future and don't look back. But as you said, the wounds are still open and many are still asking for answers.
These answers, we know, Benjamin, thousands were killed under Pinochet and so many victims are still missing. What's been done to atone for these victims and to try and seek justice?
So there has been this national search plan that I mentioned already by Luis Cordero, the justice minister, who will now search for it. But we have to look further and we have to see how long it has taken for justice. Only recently also there were some soldiers who tortured and killed Victor Jara, one of the most well-known singers in Chile, and that happened 50 years after the torture and after the murder occurred. So there are many who are still in the military. The military leaders were also absent at today's commemoration, who still have to talk, who still have to say where these people are, to give more information. And there's still more information coming out of exactly what happened there. There are new documents that have been classified by the US government, by the US Embassy in Chile, showing how the Nixon government tried to overturn Allende even before he took over power. So there are a lot of answers that are still open, wounds are open, but on days like this, you see that Chilean society is still divided on this matter.
Thank you for your reporting, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber in Santiago. Thank you so much.